Wholesalers, it's Rob Shore at Wholesaler Masterminds, and you may be thinking to yourself, Rob, you're thinking, what do you have besides this amazing podcast? And I'm so glad you asked. Wholesaler Masterminds has an assortment of product and services all designed around the art, science, and lifestyle of wholesaling. As an example, we have coaching services designed to help you power wash your practice, whether you have 2 years or 22 years. We'll offer you speaking live engagements at divisional or national sales meetings. Our scheduling service has dedicated professionals trained in the art of getting you more appointments, Wholesaler Mastermind schedulers. Our Speakers Bureau brings you amazing speakers and processes to get better return on investment out of those speakers. And finally, our partnership, our newest partnership with Allego. If you have Allego and want to get the Wholesaler Masterminds channel on your Allego platform, please let us know. Wholesaler Masterminds, happy to bring you this podcast and so much more. Wholesaler Masterminds, the art, science, and lifestyle of wholesaling. Wholesalers, sometimes we spend a lot of our energy and our effort perfecting our product and perfecting our competitor's product, working on our rotations, hopefully working on your peerless value proposition. Sometimes we don't spend as much time as we could and should on the psychology of investing, the psychology of what our advisors are experiencing with their end consumer, and maybe even a little bit about the psychology of wholesaling. We're going to get after that today. Welcome to the only podcast on the planet dedicated to exploring the art, science, and lifestyle of wholesalers and their leaders. This is the new Wholesaler Masterminds radio show. I'm your host, the founder of Wholesaler Masterminds, Rob Shore. Wholesalers, welcome back to the new Wholesaler Masterminds radio show. Dr. Moira Somers is a clinical neuropsychologist, professor, and financial recovery expert. She's on the faculty of the Sudden Money Institute, where she trains advisors on the psychological factors at play during major life transitions. Current projects include the development of a Transition Fatigue Questionnaire, which I believe is already done and available, and we'll talk about that, and objective testing of financial planners' interpersonal effectiveness. An expert on financial psychology, she trains financial professionals across North America to work more effectively with the whole spectrum of challenges their clients bring to them: erratic decisions, overwhelming stress, procrastination, family challenges, etc. Dr. Moira Somers, welcome to the new Wholesaler Masterminds radio show.
Thank you. Nice to talk to you, Rob.
It's delightful to have you here. So for folks like me that don't have their PhD in understanding what PhDs do, what exactly is a clinical neuropsychologist?
Well, like any other psychologist, we are interested in the study of human behavior, but neuropsychology focuses in at a bit more focused level on how the brain influences behavior. And I'm really interested in how, what are the hacks that we can do that really optimize cognitive functioning, neuropsychological functioning in general, and how can we work to kind of shore up those areas where we might be relying a little too much on things like willpower and not enough on things like setting up the environment to maximize our well-being and our performance.
So from that descriptor, you could be applying that to a whole range of industry, a whole range of professional, and yet your strength among many is bringing it to financial services professionals. How do you hook on the notion of the craft and practice of neuropsychology over to financial advisors and by extension our audience of wholesalers?
My interest has long been in what makes it hard for people to change when they really want to change. What makes it hard for people to reach heartfelt goals. And so for years, Rob, I worked in hospital settings working with a patient population when patients were trying to rehabilitate from injuries and saw how hard people worked and what worked and what didn't at that level. What kinds of advice were they being given? And even when the advice was excellent, why couldn't they take that advice? And, as my career went on, I became interested in applying some of those insights from the domain of medicine to other important life domains, including how people behave around their money, not just around their health. And boy, what a world I entered into inadvertently. It's just been fascinating to talk to advisors and to wholesalers and to people in the broader financial services industry about what makes it so hard for people to do the right thing with their money, and how can we get better at setting things up so that becomes much more seamless for them.
So through your efforts at money, mind, and meaning, you help us to better understand what the client is going through and how the financial advisor, and again, by extension, wholesalers, can better empathize with what the advisor goes through. And through that, I suppose we get to recognize some of the challenges going on in ourselves. You had a startling statistic inside of the PDF that you offered on transition fatigue. And I thought it was just interesting / frightening, and I began to think about my own situation. And before I go to this, wholesalers, I want to frame this for you. I read an article on LinkedIn before I came to record these shows, and it was an article from a wholesaler who used to be a former wholesaler who is now an advisor. And his point of reference was that wholesalers don't do enough to walk in the advisor's shoes, don't do enough to understand what the advisor does from day to day. And it was the universe pointing me in the direction of this article before I come to talk to Dr. Somers, because here we are helping to peel back a little bit of what the advisor experiences so we can better empathize with the advisor. So back to this notion of transition fatigue, you cite research that says 70% of new clients are people that are in the midst of major life change. Mm-hmm. Would you pull that apart for us? I mean, once I started kind of soaking in that, it became irrefutable quickly. But what do you mean by that?
So if you ask any of the advisors that the wholesalers deal with, just list your latest 10 clients and what led them to reach out to you. Chances are that the vast majority of them will be people who are either newly married or expecting a baby, or they've just received they've just sold a business and have received a big chunk of change for that. Perhaps they're facing retirement. Maybe they've never even worked with an advisor before, but now that they're facing a big transition, they're looking at the need to get some help, get some advice, because transitions involve complexity. Transitions move people from what their life used to be, into something that's profoundly different. The transition from being a not parent to a parent, the transition from being married to divorced. These are things that always involve money. That always involve money in motion and money about to change or changing. And that's when people recognize that they need more than what they've got on their own to navigate their way through that.
And if I'm going to be effective as a financial advisor in for lack of better description, what's coming to my mind is harvesting the moment. I get a lottery winner that's come to me. I have a new parent that has come to me. I have a 50-something whose parent just passed away and left them a chunk of change. Mm-hmm. This is the transition you speak about. Mm-hmm. How do I set myself up to harvest that correctly? How do I set myself up to make sure that I take care of that opportunity in the best way? What are the attributes I need to put in place? What are the skills I need to have developed or learn to develop that are going to allow me to profit, if you will, from this engagement? Mm-hmm.
I think one of the first things that you need to do is to cultivate the art of listening and to find out what is this experience like for them as they move from the old them to the new them, to this new reality. Often what people will say is that they didn't think it would be this hard, or they didn't know it would last this long. And what often happens is that they just become worn out at all levels. I'm thinking about somebody right now who's the executor of his parents' estate. And, he's got a fairly large family. He's got 5 siblings, and they're kind of a fractious bunch. The parents died together unexpectedly. And this guy has got stuff facing him that he just wasn't expecting. And so, what the advisor needs to be aware of in that moment is that people are often facing huge decisions at a time when they are tapped out emotionally, often physically, and certainly cognitively.
And you call that mental depletion, do you not?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And that's
And that's a normal phenomenon. It happens to all of us on a daily basis. It's kind of how the brain is meant to be. If you have a good night's sleep and you've got some food in your belly and you're healthy, then every day you kind of wake up with a new store of energy. And over the course of the day, that gets used up in the course of living. It's how we engage in new learning. It's what we use to carry out everyday chores. It's how we manage pain and stress. It's how we control our emotions and exert our willpower and develop habits. All of those things that are so fundamentally dependent on this 3-pound organ that is in our noggin. And so by the end of the day, we're usually tapped out, and we often realize that maybe 2 in the morning is not the time to be making huge life decisions. We should wait until we've at least had a chance to sleep on it and got a new store of things. But so that's a normal phenomenon, Rob, that mental depletion. What advisors often need to be aware of is that people in transition often kind of can't restore at the level that life is taking it out of them. So they have more demands on their plate than they have capacity to meet at the current time. So by learning how to ask questions about people's cognitive and emotional experience of going through this transition, what advisors can do is help people figure out whether they're at their best in making decisions. They can help people figure out what absolutely needs to be decided upon now, or what needs to be set in place now, and what can be deferred a little while longer. What can be taken off the plate by the advisor so that the client doesn't have as much to do. And the most skilled advisors are people who know that the more that they can take over for a client in transition, then the more likely it is that implementation will follow much more seamlessly. That's how you create grateful clients. They'll look back and they'll say, this team held me during a really important part of my life, and they kept me from getting too deep into the weeds that I couldn't find my way out again.
It's fascinating, and I want to keep the connection between our audience as the wholesaler who calls upon the advisor and the advisor who works with the end consumer. And one of the things that I'm thinking about, it's rattling around my head, is this notion of, and I've always said this, as a wholesaler, you're properly prepared for your next career, which is probably as a member of the clergy, because you're hearing things from financial advisors all the time that are, it's inside baseball stuff, and sometimes it'll just frankly curl your hair. But, you have to remain that with those qualities that the clergy has to be discerning in everything that you hear. When you're talking about the advisor with the client, isn't it true then that there are many, many advisors to their peril who don't want to go there, don't want to have that conversation, don't want to show the empathetic side, don't want to peel the onion on the challenges that you're talking about around these transitions or a mental depletion, et cetera? Is that safe to say that we've got those folks that don't even want to go there and it's ruinous to their business?
Oh, it's absolutely ruinous. I mean, whether you're a wholesaler or an advisor, Rob, you've walked this path yourself. What percentage of business of that work is about the technical side versus the personal side? How much of dealing with people and their money, or how much of dealing with advisors and their practices is about technical stuff versus psychology? I asked this at a conference I presented at lately. I said to advisors, how much of your business is about psychology? And it was 80s and 90s. And I mean, it's a funny question, and of course you can't quantify it. But what was coming back was that if you're not good at the personal side of things, then maybe you should just stay in the back office. And similarly with wholesalers, it's just really important to remember that advisors are people too, and many, many advisors are in the midst of big transitions. They're looking to transition the business itself. What is the average age of advisors? What's the average age of wholesalers? Both wholesalers and advisors are often moving through transitions in their personal life, Rob, big changes. Empty nesters, which is also, it coincides with a peak period of divorce. The average age of widowhood is late 50s. This is when inheritances are happening. There's a lot of money in motion, and there's a lot of family stuff happening. And so understanding the human side of transition is really important for both wholesalers and advisors. And the better you can get at that, the more trustworthy you are. And people just naturally want to spend time with you and want to give you their business because they trust that you have more than just the numbers in mind, that you have the skill that prevents them from making mistakes during times of distress, or even at the other end of the spectrum, making mistakes that come from hyperexcitability, being a little too optimistic sometimes, or being, pre-spending, or just hiring the wrong people because you need to expand and you need to get people on board. And when you have trusted folks like wholesalers who've walked the journey with them for a while, who could say, you might want to think about this, that, and the other thing, that makes you head and shoulders above your competitors.
But before we go in a few minutes, let's make sure that we've given and rounded out for our audience some of the other skills that advisors and wholesalers need to come equipped with when they are dealing with folks in transition. And the first one that you mentioned was listening. And then another skill that I just heard you allude to, I don't know if it's a skill or an attribute, is being steady and stable. What I heard you say was, tell me if I got it right, you weren't necessarily tilting in one direction or another in a great fashion. You were perceived to be something more of a stabilizing force in the conversation. Yes.
I've just finished a book called Advice That Sticks, written for the financial services industry. And I wrote a chapter that was based on, somebody asking that very question: what are the core competencies of people who work in this area? And I think the top two at the interpersonal level are warmth and equanimity. That quality of steadfastness that allows you to go into even areas of pretty profound emotion, and just treating that as expected and normal, and not something to get rattled by, but to be showing that you're willing to walk that journey with somebody, and you just have the ability to hear it without being rocked by it, without being embarrassed by it. If you treat emotion like it's some kind of fart at a cocktail party that everybody's just too polite to mention, you actually lose some opportunity to deepen relationships with people. When people become emotional, it's in some ways it's a sign that they trust you already, and if you can show that you're trustworthy to receive it by being warm and steadfast with them, then that puts you in a really good space to be of service to them.
I'm reflecting on what you just said, and wholesalers. This is part of training we don't get, right? I mean, your divisional manager doesn't come out and teach you how to be warmer or how to be more steadfast or how to be more measured in your approach when you're hearing simply outrageous things from advisors. And the things that we hear from advisors, as I alluded to earlier, Doctor, are they're hair curling. You know, we hear about infidelity. We hear about, I won't take our time to cite the laundry list, but you know, we hear about great things and we hear about things that are not as great. And
right. Not only do they hear about them, but they often witness them, Rob. They're often the first people to notice, for example, that people are losing it cognitively, that they're showing the early signs of dementia. One of the first places that shows up is in financial decision-making. So, yeah, advisors are in the deep end of the pool, that's for sure.
Interesting. Wholesalers, if you want to know more about Dr. Moira Somers' work, Doctor, where are we going to find you stationed at on the internet, please?
moneymindandmeaning.com.
Moneymindandmeaning.com. We will link that up in the show notes. There is a download available for you, which I operated off of for this discussion, which is Transition Fatigue, Help for Worn-Out Clients and the People Who Serve Them. Wholesalers, that sound like you and me? Absolutely. Doctor, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you so much.
Wholesalers, come back next time for the episode of the new Wholesaler Masterminds radio show. You'll find all of our content at wholesalermasterminds.com, and the podcast can be found at iTunes, Stitcher, and Google Play.